Good afternoon and welcome to Sovereign Cloud's presentation as a part of the NWR virtual conference. Sovereign Cloud is Australia's Sovereign Cloud infrastructure as a service provider exclusively focused on government, federal, state and local and critical national industry communities. It's independently certified to the protected level controls of the Australian Signals Directorate Information Security Manual. Sovereign Cloud offers two cloud operating environments as well as computing, storage, backup and disaster recovery services. It's expected to list on the ASX around the middle of next month following a $20 million IPO. Presenting from the company today, we have Phil Dawson. He's the Managing Director and one of the co-founders. Prior to moving to Australia in 2016, he was co-founding CEO of UKCloud, the leading provider of infrastructure as a service to UK government. With the success of UK Cloud under his belt, Phil decided to team up with a group of Aussie entrepreneurs to develop the market for Sovereign Cloud in Australia. For those that are attending, please feel free to ask questions via the Q&A box down the bottom, and I'll pass it over to Phil. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks a lot. And good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining in. I guess the headline message from today's presentation is pretty simple. We're at the convergence point of several megatrends, not only cloud, where the evidence of economics and speed and agility are becoming increasingly proven and clear, but because of the investments that we've made to date in AuCloud, in the technology, in the people, and in also developing relationships, we're really well placed to benefit from government's migration to cloud services and also the wider growth of digital technologies. A little bit about me. I guess my background is, UK Cloud was the leading provider in the UK over a 4 or 5 year period, and from 2012 to 15 was the fastest growing tech company in the UK, from startup, new entrant, and became the leading provider. So the so what really of that is that I understand about government and about creating commercial relationships with channel partners, about persuading incumbents to change their business model, and most importantly about building and scaling a technology business. AuCloud is completely separate from UK Cloud. It became very clear to me when I moved, before I moved to Canberra 3 years ago, that the business had to be Australian owned. That was a clear message that was coming out of some senior elements of government at that point in time. What we provide is infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, and effectively it's the next level above a data center. So many of you will be familiar with data center businesses like CDC, Canberra Data Centers, and the IaaS piece is similar in a similar business model. It grows as government outsources its infrastructure and also as the new requirements come on for new digital services. We've invested as a business over $35 million to date over the last 3 years, and we've built up a community of in excess of 60 channel partners who've built their business, begun to build their go-to-market on our proposition. The sort of position we've built ourselves into and created is, I said at the outset, we're at the convergence point of several megatrends, not only cloud, but also cyber. Cyber is a word that's barely used about 5 years ago, and it's now on the sort of front page of most media most days. Other trends that we're sort of sit at the center of are around the increasing working from home. Many of you may be still doing that, although I think now that Victoria's free, that may be less so, and also mobile working as well. And then the sort of final trends that have emerged, particularly over the last 12, 24 months, around sovereignty, around the fact that government is concerned about where its data is, who has access to its data, and the security and privacy risks around that. And also an emerging trend around cost consciousness, or around the essentially recessionary challenges that are facing us today. The piece around government and data is they've begun to sort of double down on the considerations and concerns, not only around sovereignty, but also about what best practice could or should look like, Through the Australian Cyber Security Centre, a new framework has been introduced that relates to what that is, and that has now significant implications. It was introduced in July, and it's already created significant implications and opportunities as government begins to outsource to cloud services rather than doing them itself. And in fact, the actual strategy, the new assessment framework calls out that it's in many cases a lower risk posture for government to move to cloud than to actually do it itself, which has been the traditional way of government managing its data and its compute. The question now is almost more around why not sovereign rather than why sovereign, which is pretty significant. And we've been heavily involved in the direction of that particular framework. We've also been heavily involved in the new cyber security strategy, which came out. We were actually cited in that. And recently, Kathy Reid, our chair, she's actually been asked to join as deputy chair for the National Advisory Committee. So we see a sort of reflection of our significant role in working with government to develop best practice. The problem we're solving as government looks for solutions for sovereignty and security and the availability of their systems sort of falls in our value proposition, falls into three categories. The first one is around sovereignty itself. And when I talk about sovereignty, I talk about it in three different sort of dimensions. The first is around sovereignty of ownership, which is ensuring that as an organization, we're only effectively affected by Australian legislation. Sovereignty of location, which means that all the data we are supporting government with is retained in Australia, and that's not just the customer data, but it's also the metadata, the monitoring data, the support data, the analytics data that lays there. It never leaves Australian soil or territory, or is accessible under some of the government law. And then the third area of sovereignty is around our actual operation. All our support and service delivery is done in Australia by Australian citizens who are actually vetted and appropriately security vetted. So that aspect of sovereignty significantly de-risks government's approach to data management. There's obviously a strong overlap between sovereignty and security. And the security aspect is that all our activities are accredited by government and operate to or beyond controls that are necessary to support data classified up to what's called protected level. So protected is government's highest level of data security before you get into secret and top secret. We've combined our security with a world-class cyber threat monitoring technology of the kind that's used in the UK by high end of government and national security type organisations. We have that under exclusivity, and that's a significant point of value for us in our offering to government. And then the third area after sovereignty and security that is our value proposition is really around performance and ensuring that customers are able to remain in control of the services that they want to operate, and they can either do this through a portal, a web interface, or more importantly, they can do this through code. So everything that all the services that we provide can be initiated and increased, scaled up, scaled down through automation and through code, which means customers only pay for what they use and what they need. And that's delivered through smarts and IP technology that we've developed over the last 3 years. What this means is that we're able to compete and have points of differences that are relevant against global providers. So we are competing against some of the biggest companies in the world. It's something I did successfully in the UK, and it's something that we're increasingly successful in Australia and in federal government in Canberra. We're able to match the global providers for automation, for agility, and for commercials, but we're also able to more than match them on flexibility, on sovereignty, and alignment of what we do and everything, the way that we do it, with Australian government needs. And some of those are around, and not to be overlooked really, is that all customer service happens in Australia. We're providing local customer service, but we're also making decisions in Australia. That gives us an agility and an empathy with the customer that doesn't always happen with global providers. The other space that we're competing against is other local providers. We have relevant points of difference against them. Most of those local providers are companies who are generally integrated. They integrate their cloud infrastructure with, they maybe have data centers. They almost always provide a wide range of managed services. And the challenge for integrated companies who are providing a wide range of managed services is they're competing with those organizations that are our channel to market. So a key point of our business model is that we enable channel partners, systems integrators, defense primes, local managed service providers, software as a service companies, cybersecurity companies, to be able to deliver their business model on our infrastructure. And if you're integrated and providing services that compete with them, you're not an attractive channel partner. That means you're only able to really reach the market where you're successful in your managed services, whereas we have a widespread reach across the whole of the market, which allows us also to scale more quickly. We do have a local competitor, AuCloud, who's more of a pure play like ourselves, but our points of differences there are really around our existing channel community of over 60 organizations who are already active and have built their business model on us. We have access to a world-leading cyber threat technology that provides a real strong point of difference. And we also have the support of global technology vendors and partners like Cisco and VMware, who themselves have significant networks and influence within the federal government market. So while we have these sort of points of difference against the global providers and the locals, the real critical kind of competition today remains government doing it themselves, doing it in-house or self-managed. And that's a piece that is beginning to significantly change with the new cloud framework, and also as government has got to find a way to do more with less. What I'll do now over the next couple of slides is I'll just walk you through a real world example of how our partner strategy is working in practice, and how that practically sort of initial land of a contract actually grows as we work with a company, a partner. So this example here is a global systems integrator, probably one of the largest systems integrators in the world. We're supporting one of their largest contracts for Australian Defence, and it's one of their largest customers in Australia, and it's a mission critical application that we're delivering. After the initial win of that contract, which is pretty considerable if you take into account that organization has large Microsoft in-house and AWS teams, we secured a global master service agreement. And it's the kind of thing that, my experience from the UK, that will grow. It will grow significantly for us, and it already is. We contracted that and landed it, the dark blue circles, and very quickly that expanded. It expanded into a new SOC as a service within the core contract, but also the light blue aspects represent where other practices within the organization began to bid and tender for work in their markets based on AuCloud. So example A would be a national intelligence practice that have bid a couple of opportunities for us. And the example B would be in the financial services sector, in banking, where they've bid and tendered on something that we're doing. And we expect to see those grow, not only the core contract, but also additional ones as well as that organization extends. What that looks like in a sort of holistic way across the whole of our pipeline, which is around about $80 million and over 150 opportunities that are live and real. If you kind of look at the dark blue, you'll see some of the contract wins. But then if you look through, as we've got some things in negotiation, some things at proposal where we've actually put together some pricing and support and tendering for our partners or directly, and then pre-proposal, you get a sense of the activity that I just described with the SI in dark blue. Another example is the yellow bubble. That's a rarity for us because we can actually talk about it, and the customer's happily gone public with that. And that's a contract that we delivered to the Australian National University, ANU, at the beginning of the COVID crisis, where we were able within 6 days to stand up a virtual environment that allowed 20,000 students and staff to continue to access their work online. And you'll see the impact of those yellows, not only through other ANU opportunities, but the wider education sector that we're now engaged with. Another example is the lighter blue, which is a sort of typical of a local managed service provider who's pretty much now defaulted to bidding almost entirely all activities on AuCloud. So that's sort of where our growth comes through. And you can kind of get a sense of the relative orders of magnitude of these opportunities. What that looks like in sort of historic terms, about a year ago, 15 months ago or so, we had built out the platform, we'd had accreditation, we'd begun to build our partner base. We were challenged with the catch-22 conundrum that it was hard to win projects without having a reference, but obviously you couldn't get a reference till you'd actually won a project. And with support of one of our vendors, who effectively provided paid for proof of value catalysts, we ran a number of those through the period. As those came to an end, the organizations we were working with would convert those into live projects. And then you see over the last couple of quarters of the year, with a little support from us in the sort of mid-blue color, where we helped and handheld some of them to on board. The underlying infrastructure as a service, the sort of underlying repeatable monthly consumption has grown as we've gone through, and through the last quarter as well, i.e. the first quarter of FY21. That's continued. And that's the nature of the business that we're in, that pipeline that we highlighted. The underlying dark blue, it will be driven by growth in projects. It will be driven by growth within existing projects, within new projects within the same customer. It will be driven by adding new users to software for some of the software customers. It will be driven by partners adding new environments for new projects, as well as those projects in the pipeline themselves landing and having new projects. Hopefully this has provided some color to the whole prospectus document. On a personal level, thanks for the time. I'm very happy to take questions now. I can see a few coming through, but I'll leave that for moderator to manage.
Right. Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks so much for the presentation. The first question, can you talk about the competitive environment and where you see your advantage or moat over other competitors? Also, who do you view as your competitors?
So our competitor is AWS, Amazon Web Services. They are the largest organization maybe in the world today, certainly in the area of infrastructure as a service. And I strongly believe that we can compete with them with points of difference that have value to government and critical national industries, which is our chosen target addressable market. Our points of difference are, as I outlined, we can match them on the automation and on the agility and on the commercials, but we can deliver certain aspects of sovereignty and security, delivering customer service in Australia with Australian citizens. That is of value to government, and increasingly so as the new best practices emerging. And that's a similar case for Microsoft, which is the main other competitor in our chosen market. If you can compete successfully against those, then you're well placed to be able to compete against the local providers.
Great, thanks, Phil. And just a reminder for those on the line, if you did want to ask a question, do so via the Q&A box down the bottom. Next question, is it possible for global competitors, i.e. operators headquartered outside Australia, to compete for government contracts?
Absolutely it is. It's probably become more difficult under the new framework, because there are some aspects of data that are called out. So whereas previously it was easy to kind of assume that data remained in Australia, well, the database data may remain in Australia, but actually there's a lot of other data associated with it, that metadata monitoring that was going to support centres in Singapore or Ireland or Seattle. So that's challenging now, because that's come under the spotlight of the new regime. And the whole aspect of ownership and different legislation, extrajudicial legislation, is called out under the new framework, which gives governments around the world their ability to force an organisation that's owned by someone sovereign to their nation to give access to data. And that came very much in line with the COVID Safe app, where government had to try and pass legislation to mitigate that. So yes, they can compete. They're massive companies, they're big machines, but we have our ways of and our partner model is very strong there, because many of our partners are Australian sovereign companies themselves. Some of them aren't, but we're able to help those that aren't to provide a service wrap that gives a clarity of sovereignty around the data and the risk to the data.
Right, and probably just an extension from that, you talked about your partner model, but how do you go about differentiating your product against global competitors if they're sourcing from the same global product suppliers?
So that's one of the issues that they aren't always. So one of the challenges for branded vendors like a Cisco or a Pure Storage or a VMware, slightly differently, a software provider, is that the large global providers are not necessarily buying global branded hardware. They're building that themselves. And therefore, if you're a Cisco or a Pure Storage, AuCloud you have a decreasing customer base as more and more workloads move onto cloud platforms. So that's why we have relevance and importance to those vendors, and why, albeit a relatively small company in a place they've never heard of in Australia, which they barely understand, obviously being slightly flippant here, but why it's important to them, because they need to nurture the generation of cloud providers who can do that. So the way we compete against the globals is they have some inherent complexity to the way they work. So we've built out what I know from experience is minimum efficient scale to be able to compete. And organizations like VMware, that's the most common technology that's used around the world in what's called virtualization. And virtualization is the technology that allows cloud computing at the infrastructure layer to occur. So our relationship with VMware is important, because it means that for government to move existing workloads to us, it's usually been moved from a VMware environment already. And so that de-risks their migration. And that's been proven by the SI that we've worked with that I cited.
Great, thanks, Phil. And with your pipeline at the proposal stage, what's been your historical win rate?
It really varies. I mean, it depends whether it's a direct government. So most of what we do by number of projects is through channel partners, but actually by value of projects has been direct, largely with the ANU project that I highlighted. What we do is we're growing that pervasiveness of access to lots of tenders, and that's been a particular case since the snapshot of the prospectus, I think, was 12th, 13th, 17th of October or something like that. That was pre-budget. The budget has put a lot more into ICT in Canberra, and that's started to come through another pipeline already.
Right. And can you provide an idea of how long your sales cycle is, maybe by type of customer or however you segment your customers?
It really varies. So we delivered to ANU in 6 days from the first phone call. That is a complete outlier. The implementation of the SI project over 12 months is probably on the outlier scale of implementation. Typically, we're looking at contracts that are probably from 1 month to 3 years, but essentially the commitment, it can be as small as 3 months because somebody is using burst capacity or something. In terms of kind of scale of contract, again, they vary. You can see from the bubble sizes that they vary as well. Some of that's driven by a term, but some of it's just driven by the complexity of what they're doing. My experience in the UK is that there is a extremely low churn rate. Once people come on and move some of their workloads to cloud, they start to understand both the technical flexibility that they have, but also the commercial benefit value to them. And that's an important part of the channel, helping them understand how they will make more money and be more successful, which is what we do. We have a lot of kind of ways of doing that.
Right. And how large do you estimate the addressable market is? What share of public sector workloads are currently on the cloud? And what's the market share of AuCloud against other public cloud competitors?
The first one first, there's numbers in the prospectus around it. I didn't show the slide, but it's broadly showing, I think, a compound annual growth rate of somewhere around 15-16%. The market size in government about 10 bill. I think it actually is higher than that when you start to add in state governments and critical national industries. It's a big number. The amount of workloads across government that have actually moved to cloud, my personal view on it is, and it's something that's, I can't put in the prospectus, and I'll take it. It's very, very small single figure percentages.
Great, thanks. What's the payback on the server racks you buy on behalf of customers? What's the typical contract tenure?
Typical contract tenure, as I said, can be anything from sort of 3 months, but typically a year to 3 years. That's sort of government's cadence, its cycle. In terms of payback on racks, there's a sense of we've built out. So if you think about a data center building out a lot of concrete and fences and things, and building out its power source, our equivalent of that is the network, and we've built that out, and then the investment therefore is a sort of incremental one now as customers grow, and so the supply chain allows us to respond very quickly. We have pretty strong capacity management, both on a longer term basis, but on a day-to-day. So we're able to really optimize the ROI on the incremental new. We've obviously invested significantly to create the minimum efficient scale, predominantly the network, in the way that data centers create. A typical data center minimum efficient scale today is about 25 megawatts. If you're building it smaller than that, you're probably not going to get the return on investment that allows you to be competitive.
Great. One final question, unless something else pops up. What other customers, i.e. non-government, are you chasing?
So we're proactively focused on Canberra, and part of the use of funds is to actually become more proactive into state governments and critical national industries. Part of our difference is we only allow or support government, defence, healthcare, critical national industries onto our environments. That reduces the threat vector, and there's a certain amount of there's a set of rules they have to sign up to, which is a sort of security enhancement for all of them. That's the that's kind of the focus for us. So we're not going into lots of others, but we do work with the channel partners, the IT community that delivers services to that community as well. So it's a pretty significant proportion of GDP, the market sectors that we're involved in.
Great. And just another question for comparison, what is the scale, revenue and profit that UKCloud reached after 5 to 10 years of operation?
So UKCloud, when I left it, had been operating for about 4 years and was about £30 million, so about $60 million at that point. It was starting to get to a kind of the sort of top end of the S curve in terms of without sort of reinvesting profits back into other aspects, which we did in terms of cloud for defence and national intelligence and the like. That business was operating at sort of high 70% gross margins, and well, without the further investment or reinvestment, yeah, sort of circa 30% net margins.
Right, that concludes the Q&A. Phil, I might hand it back to you just for closing remarks, but obviously the company's listing on the ASX in the middle of December, and it's certainly had a lot of fans early, so we wish you all the best, but maybe you just want to wrap up and we'll close it there.
No, I just want to say, thank you for taking the time out of your days to listen. We're obviously very excited by the opportunity. We've worked hard to put ourselves in the place of these mega trends and to create the momentum across our partnering community. Government's starting to really shift to cloud and to secure sovereign cloud, and that's where we're at. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks very much for everyone for joining.
Thank you.